dear viewers, thank you for joining us. You're watching our weekly program, Talk to OBN on OBN Horn of Africa. In this edition today, we'll be talking about BRICS affair. And here in studio, I'm joined by economic expert, Mr. Zamadin Hanegatu. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, what is your takeaway from the BRICS summit in South Africa lately?
Right. So first and foremost, it's important to explain to you viewers what BRICS is all about. It was a group that was formed back in 2009 by 4 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And then a couple, 3 years later, they added South Africa. So now it's called BRICS, which is the S stands for South Africa. The whole idea of the BRICS is to really be counter the world order as it exists today. At least that's the aim, both geopolitically, but more importantly on the economic front. I mean, at least when they were set up, there was and still is this question of, do we want the global order as it exists today to continue? And the reason that question came up is because the world order as we know today was created after 1945, after the end of the Second World War, which was led by the United States. So the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, these institutions were created then in a different era. And to this day, they're obviously very much influenced by the United States, okay? Because the US is was a superpower then, still is a superpower. So these groupings, if you take China, if you take India, 40 years ago, they were very, very, very poor countries. Forget 1945. India, in fact, in 1945 was under British colonial rule. So they were saying the world has changed in the last 70 years, 70 some odd years, but the way the world is run today does not reflect the reality on the ground. China is today the second largest economy in the world. By some forecasts, by the mid-2030s, China's economy on an aggregate GDP basis is forecast to be bigger than the United States. If you look at India, which actually used to be the lead in the non-alignment movement 30, 40 years ago, it was a very poor country. Today, India is the 5th largest economy in the world, okay? And the same thing, I mean, Brazil is a bigger economy than it was. So the thinking was, the world has changed, but it's not reflecting the reality on the ground. So they said we need to create our own grouping. Some of it is aspirational, but some of it is real. So that's what the BRICS stand for. Now, where are they today? And I'll come to your question in a moment. But where are the BRICS today? And in pure numbers terms, they account for about 30% of global GDP and 40% of the world population. So they are already formidable on these fronts, on these multiple fronts. But for me, the BRICS power and influence will be manifested in the decades to come, even more so than it is today, okay? So, for a long time, there's just been the 5 countries. But I know, especially in China, there's always been this desire to expand the base, to add more members. Remember, we now have essentially 2 superpowers, the United States and China, right? And both have their own goals. The US would love for the current system to continue. Rightly so. I mean, it's a superpower, works well for the United States. And the Chinese are saying this is not the way we want to go. So there is definitely a clash between those two, and each is creating its groupings. The US has the G7. We have the G20, but it's becoming less and less influential, I suppose. It's not achieving what it was intended to. I think the G20 was created right after the global financial crisis in 2008. At the beginning, there was a lot of hope, especially by expanding it beyond the G7, adding it up to 20 countries, but it hasn't really been that effective. And as I said, China wants something that has a very significant role. India, the same thing. These are big countries. So that's where we are as BRICS today. But as I said, for me, if I were to look at 10, 20, 30 years down the road, it will be much more, even more formidable than it is today. Okay? So in this scenario, you asked me what I thought about the South African summit. First and foremost, it's gotten more attention. This BRICS summit got more attention than any of the previous 15. Okay? For two reasons. One, the timing, the geopolitics. As you know, one of the member countries is Russia. But overall, geopolitics right now is at its peak. It seems like after the end of the Cold War in the early 90s, late 80s, 89, after the Berlin Wall fell, there was this thinking that maybe there would be a unified world, everybody migrating to the same system, which was created by the West, led by the West. And for a while, especially, for example, when China joined the WTO, with the big support of the United States, there was this hope, thinking that there would be one order, which fits into what was created, as I said, after the end of the Second World War. But I think the other rising powers, in particular China, had a different thinking. Okay? So where we are today now is China and India, which are very large countries population-wise, economic-wise. I mean, China is number 2, India is number 5. Imagine, these are really big numbers. They want their grouping, the BRICS, to have a significant say in how the world is run. And some will say they want to disrupt the way things are. They want not only to have a voice, but they want to shape, influence thinking. And that's kind of where this whole thing comes in. So they got a lot of attention because of geopolitics and the ascendancy of certain emerging markets like China and India today to rival G7 economies, which for a long time were the dominant powers, the G7, the G7, G7. So within that, it got a lot of attention. Second, the reason it got a lot of attention is the BRICS have been indicating for a while now that they intend to add new members. It's a new thing. It's a breaking news kind of element. So both in the West, in the US, in Europe, and in the rest of the world was a lot of attention who would be admitted, because there were 40 countries, reportedly, who had expressed an interest to join the BRICS. So this gets a lot of attention. And of course, on the final day of the summit, they made the breaking news. They announced 6 countries. So because of all these, that's kind of how I see it. It was a milestone summit.
The Argentina Republic, the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the United Arab Emirates became full member of BRICS, and it will be effected from the coming January 2024. The funny part of this is we have witnessed some countries which are strong ally to the US became member of the BRICS. We can mention the Saudi Arabia. What's your takeaway again on this regard?
Does it mean, I don't see it as either or. In other words, yes, in the West, in some quarters, it might be seen as, well, these countries who are joining the BRICS, maybe they're not aligned with the West anymore. I don't see that at all, okay? And let me explain. So I was also on Indian television a couple of nights ago as well. They asked what I thought about that. They had a different take as well. Let me explain my view, okay? Yes, the BRICS, both the existing members, the new ones, and probably more to come in future years, as I mentioned to you earlier, would like to see a different world order where they have a voice. You know, there's a difference between sitting at the table where decisions are made, where you have an input and influence, or you're excluded from the decision making, you're a recipient of decisions. And that's what the BRICS are saying. We want to be able to make the decisions that affects us, that affects the world. We can't just be recipients of orders coming in from the West, okay? But it doesn't mean, like you mentioned, Saudi Arabia. I just came today from UAE. It doesn't mean these countries will abandon the relationship that they have with the United States in particular, with the West, but led by the US. It doesn't mean, it's not a mutually exclusive relationship in my view. What they're saying is, we want to have a voice. We've risen, but the system today doesn't recognize us. Okay? So UAE is a very strong ally of the United States. They trade a lot with the U.S. They buy a lot of military equipment. The U.S. exports a lot of stuff to Saudi Arabia, UAE. Take Ethiopia. We have a 100+ year relationship with the United States. We've been strong allies. Yes, the last couple of years it was a little rough patch we had, but we patched that up together. Doesn't mean that Ethiopia.
So being member of BRICS doesn't affect the relationship of those nations with that of the non-BRICS countries?
Well, and it requires careful management,
Yeah.
right? I mean, as I said, if I'm an American president, my primary goal is to protect American interest. And the way the system is set up today serves American interest. There's nothing wrong with President Biden or whomever else comes in the future years trying to ensure the current system continues. There's nothing wrong with this. Every country has to have its country's interest at the front table. But I will answer your question. If I was a policymaker in Washington today, or an EU, European Union official sitting in Brussels, I would think of how I can entice and retain these relationships. No one in Washington should look at it as saying, whoa, these guys are joining the BRICS. That means they don't want to be with us. I don't think anyone smart enough in Washington should think like that.
Okay, in your insight earlier on, you said BRICS has been established to counter the unipolar world and aiming to bring a multipolar order.
Right.
What about this concept of de-dollarization in that regard, though?
Right. This has also gotten a very good point you raised. This has gotten a lot of attention. Mm. So let me tell you, from a financial perspective, from an investor's perspective, people need to be aware the United States dollar will remain the reserve currency of the world for a long time to come. Yes, 20 years ago, 21 years ago, before the euro was issued, the US dollar was 70% of global reserves. Today is 59%. It's almost 60%. So there is nothing viable today to replace the dollar as a reserve currency. However, and this is the part that business people, investors need to understand, is de-dollarization for me means being practical. And I'll give you examples. What means, for example, if Ethiopia is trading with China, why do we have to trade in dollars? Okay? Ethiopia buys stuff from China in yuan. China buys stuff from Ethiopia in birr. Why don't we swap the birr and the yuan in trading terms? Today, the way it happens is contracts are structured in dollar terms. Every dollar transaction, whether it's related to the United States or not, has to pass through the U.S. Federal Reserve in New York. There's a cost to that. So when I talk about de-dollarization, and even some of the thoughtful people within BRICS, when they explain to you this in a thoughtful way, you will understand. It doesn't mean we'll abandon the United States dollar as a reserve currency. That's not going to happen anytime soon. It will gradually decline, but there's nothing viable out there. The euro is not a rival to the dollar. Okay? The Chinese yuan has increased in value, but there are a number of issues that would make it difficult for the yuan to be the US dollar level reserve currency. It has increased its power. So what I'm talking about is, let's be practical as BRICS members or even non-BRIC members. When you trade amongst yourselves, try to find a way to swap your currencies. That reduces your exchange risk. It reduces your transaction costs, a lot of it. That's what de-dollarization. I'll give you a very, very recent, very good example between Nigeria and Ethiopia. Dangote, who is the richest man in Africa, he owns a cement factory here in Ethiopia. I think it's the biggest cement factory in Ethiopia. Sure. He was trying to repatriate money, dividends, back to Nigeria. Ethiopian Airlines, which is the largest airline in Africa, had millions of nairas, which he was trying to repatriate in dollars to Ethiopia, which was stuck there for a long time. You know what they did? The Ethiopians and the Nigerians were smart enough to say, we swap naira with birr. We didn't have to say we swap dollars. Take the birr, exchange it to dollars, send it to naira. Naira exchange to dollar and bring it back to Ethiopia. This is what de-dollarization for me it means. It doesn't mean the US dollar reserve currency status will be eliminated. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So if we do more of these, we reduce in a practical
What about this way? Instead of swap the currencies of each nation with respective other nation, it's better to have, an intersection currency that stands for BRICS countries. What do you think?
So that's, I know what you're getting at. That's more complicated. You know, one currency for BRICS countries, a common currency. The one that has succeeded so far that I know is the euro. Okay, but that started in 1959. The whole idea of the European Union was conceived, and it took them 40 years, 1992, to launch it. And this is like very advanced economies with a lot of commonality. By the way, when they started, the EU was very small. It was, their sizes were the same, their economies. I'll put that as phase 2 or phase 3. What I'm talking about is because we are involved in these kinds of transactions every day on a global basis. I can tell you, if you make it practical, the Dangote Ethiopian Airlines example, the Ethiopia trading with China, yuan and birr, with India, rupee, Ethiopian Indians buying stuff from Ethiopia. If you do that, then you start building the mechanism and the system and the confidence level. So let's not aspire or aim for something that's not going to happen, which is eliminate the US dollar as a currency reserve. That's not going to happen.
Let me get back to my springboard. Ethiopia became a member of BRICS, and there was breaking news lately. What makes Ethiopia be chosen by BRICS, though, among the 40 applicants?
Right. So, a number of factors. First and foremost, BRICS is a forward-looking grouping, right? Yes, it's substantial, it's influential, as I mentioned here, but over the next decades, they're looking for countries that will be very significant players on the global stage, both geopolitically, but for us as business people, on the economic front. They were looking at, and this is my understanding, they looked at the growth pattern of Ethiopia over the last 15 years. One of the fastest growing economies in the world. This is from IMF World Bank data, which anybody can verify. Even the last 3 years, when Ethiopia went through some challenging times, COVID, the internal conflict, the Russia-Ukraine issue, even during that period, according to the IMF, this year, the forecast is it will be the fastest growing of the 5 largest economies in sub-Saharan Africa. So when you're assessing membership, new members, this is the kind of dynamics you're looking for. I'll give you something which is even longer, because as I said, it's a forward. There's an American investment bank, the world's largest investment bank. It's called Goldman Sachs. It's based in New York. They have a forecast out for the next, of course it's much longer, the next 40 years, the 25 largest economies in the world. Goldman Sachs, who we know very well, and they're very reliable, they're serious, thoughtful people. I've put the Ethiopian GDP at $6.2 trillion by 2070, something like that. Number 17. Among the 25 largest, it will be at 17. 17th in the world. Okay? So if you are a decision maker within BRICS, who should I include? These are the kind. Population-wise, second largest today, 125, 127 million people. Say by another 20 years, it will be 180 million. There's a forecast that says by 2050, it will be amongst the 10 largest. So you need bulk, you need size, you need demographic advantages. You don't just want small countries to join.
What about geographical positioning?
I was going to come to the third point. That's the geopolitical. Remember, BRICS has both a geopolitical agenda, but an economic agenda. Geopolitically, let's be real. Ethiopia is extremely important for Africa, and more importantly for Eastern Africa. It's the anchor. Yes, we've had our, I think as Ethiopians, we'll be honest, we've had our challenges lately, but I think we'll overcome it. We're overcoming it. So, but you don't look at myopic views as of today, right? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 down the road. So, strategic location, many other factors considered. I mean, we are at the crossroads of the Red Sea. We may not have our own seaport today. I know there's a lot of talk lately that we will get our own, but regardless, it's a very important, it's a bulwark for East Africa, the Horn of Africa. So both the East and the West would love to have a partner that is an anchor in this part of the world. Ethiopia plays also a very significant role in Pan-Africanism and the African integration. Not only the fact that the AU's headquarters right here in Ethiopia, but from an influential political agenda setting perspective. So all these factors combined, in my view, a couple of months ago, when this whole talk about Ethiopia applying came out in the news, I was interviewed on one of the international TV channels. I was bold enough to say Ethiopia will join. I hedged a little bit saying, is it going to be in August, is it going to be next? But I was confident if you look at it the way we do. Sometimes people get emotional and their judgments are clouded, not driven by data. I look at data. People like me look at data. We look at substance. And I knew Ethiopia was going to be admitted. I was just happy it happened this time. So
yes, meanwhile, I have also heard your insight on BBC Africa,
right.
BBC Focus Africa.
Right.
You've said Ethiopia has been chosen by BRICS, among others, with the reason of one of the fastest economy in sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
Is that real? There are so many people who failed to leak this reality. Can you substantiate this?
I deal with numbers, okay? Sometimes I see people writing on social media, which is not based on facts. I stick to facts. By the way, I stick to what I know, okay? It has been one of the fastest growing economies for the last 15 years. This is a fact. Even during, as I mentioned to you, even during the last 3 years, which we all admit as Ethiopians has been a challenging period for Ethiopia. COVID, the conflict in the north, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which exploded prices beyond belief, fertilizers, oils, and all that. Despite all this, it is still the fastest growing economy amongst the largest economies in Africa. I'll give you something else, by the way, and this is verifiable. Okay, you go to the World Bank database. Now, you can question the IMF and the World Bank if you want to, but they are the repositories of data. They have means to verify these things, because sometimes when I speak to an audience like this or somewhere, if I use just government figures, in any country, by the way, people might discount it. So I use IMF, World Bank data, okay? So if you look at it from that perspective, it is a fact. It's a fact. It's been a growing...
Still the fastest growing economy.
Go to the IMF website, database. It's available to anybody. Just type in the Ethiopian data. 6.2% is the forecast for this year. Let me give you something even more interesting. Over the last 25 years, if you look at who has grown the fastest on an annual basis, number one was China, number two was Ethiopia. On a global scale. This is from IMF World Bank database. So, we went from an $8 billion GDP, I agree was tiny little nothing, to 156 billion in a span of 20 plus years. These are verifiable data. So that's why I'm confident when I tweet, as you know, I'm very active on Twitter, but I talk about finance and all that. Not discounting some of the challenges we're facing. I'm very honest about that. But we also have to look at the achievements of the country. Okay, even during difficult, very resilient economy. So that's one of the reasons I think.
Wonderful. You've mentioned, this population having huge number of working force,
right,
and this geographic positioning,
right,
and maybe being one of the fastest growing economy in sub-Saharan Africa made Ethiopia to be chosen by BRICS. Right. So why not Nigeria in the domains of talking about this, having this huge population?
I was recently in Nigeria.
And the position of Nigeria is still appealing for the world as well.
Right. I was asked, it's a good thing you asked me this question. I was asked the same question yesterday.
Seriously?
On the BBC, yeah.
Oh, okay.
They were saying, why was Nigeria not selected? I was surprised. Now, I don't know how much preparation they had done, if they had done anything, what they're applying. But Nigeria would also have been, look who was selected from Africa, Egypt and Ethiopia. the third natural
We'll
choice.
come to Egypt later.
Yeah,
huh?
the third natural choice would have been Nigeria. So I'm not sure why Nigeria was not selected. As I said, maybe they didn't apply fully, or maybe they didn't have. I don't know. It's a surprise. It's a big economy. It's 200 million plus. We're currently doing business in Nigeria. We've been traveling a lot. It's a dynamic place. The other one people are asking me is with Kenya. I can tell you, in Kenya, the issue is, if you read the Kenyan media, the Kenyans are they're hedging their bets. They're worried about the perception of joining a bloc, the BRICS, which at the moment in some circles is seen as anti-West, and the Kenyans are a little edgy. That's what the media says in Kenya. I don't know, but as I told you, it's not an either.
Affiliate to the UK.
But listen, Hadis, if Saudi Arabia and UAE were very strong allies of the United States, are interested and now members of BRICS, I don't think any African country should worry what Washington will say, because Washington is smart enough. Doesn't mean Saudi Arabia doesn't mean Ethiopia is abandoning the United States. It's not. It's just adding a layer of more relationships to what exists. So I would hope the Kenyans the Kenyans didn't apply, from what I understand. They didn't even want to think about it for now.
Would this Green Legacy initiative got a room in BRICS selection of Ethiopia?
Well, the Green Legacy initiative of Ethiopia is actually on the leading edge of transformation. I think not just by developing countries standards, because that's where a lot of the world is heading. See, we're lucky. Maybe we're latecomers to this thing, and we're starting to adapt the global best practices on green legacies and all that. I mean, China, 40 years ago, when they were growing, they grew at any cost to the environment. They polluted but now they're wealthy enough, they're cleaning things up, they're greening up. If you go to Beijing or even Delhi, New Delhi, smog some days, you can't go out, right? So for us, actually, the BRICS countries probably something they can learn from. Listen, 98% of Ethiopia's energy is renewable. This is where the rest of the world wants to head. So I think there are a number of things probably they can learn from us, and we can learn from them as well, what not to do, the wrong things about the environment and things like that. But how much impact did that have on this election? I'm not sure.
Okay. President Xi Jinping has appreciated Ethiopia's development initiatives carried out in the last few years, including the Green Legacy program. Does this reflect Ethiopia's green economic development winning the global recognition?
As I just mentioned to you, I think the Ethiopia's green legacy, green transformation, we see it. I mean, as I was driving here, for example, I saw the city here. We're here today in Adama. I knew it many years ago when it didn't have very many trees.
It was very scorchy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, and I actually came with
you
my
arrived
son.
Here taking the good advantage.
Yeah, and my son, he's here from Boston. He said, "Dad, this place looks green. It looks even the whole drive from Addis is green." So, listen, there's a lot I'm sure they can learn from us, and a lot we can learn from them as well. So yes.
Ethiopia has applied to join World Trade Organization. Will its BRICS membership help in joining the organization, though?
The standalone WTO, I'm on the record for the last 15 years. We should have joined WTO a long time ago. Okay? And I'm happy now it's an accelerated path, or at least it's on the process. Yes, it helps us. We can't be this size of an economy. From what I understand, if I'm not mistaken, where Ethiopia is the only country of this size of GDP that's not a member of the WTO. If we want to be part of the global trading system, we need to be part of the global trade order, okay? And WTO is one of them. Now, the WTO's value is not what it used to be, by the way. Okay, it was paramount a long time ago, but now it's degrading. Not completely, but it's degrading. Its influence is degrading because for a variety of reasons. But we need to join WTO.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, economic expert and long-serving personality in Ethiopia, Africa, and beyond, Mr. Zamade Negatu. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Dear viewers, thank you for being with us so far. This brings you to the end of our edition for today. Bye-bye. Take care.